Welcome to AI, Government and the Future, a podcast by Corner Alliance. We explore the intersection of artificial intelligence, government and the future with your host, Alan Pence. We work with government to create results. We ignite your agency's mission by helping you to design and implement high-impact and innovative federal programs in AI, broadband, cybersecurity, public safety, and more. Being a government ally is at the core of all we do. Introducing your host, Alan Pence.
All right, welcome back to AI, Government and the Future. I am your host, Max Romanek. Today, we are joined by John Gillham, a visionary entrepreneur and trailblazer in the AI and content verification space. John is the founder of Originality.ai, a cutting-edge platform that helps content marketers, writers, and publishers ensure the integrity of their work in a world where generative AI is reshaping the way we create and consume content. He also co-founded adbank.network, a pioneering platform using blockchain and AI to combat ad fraud, and Motion Invest, a marketplace that simplifies the buying and selling of content websites. With a wealth of experience in AI detection and marketing solutions, John is at the forefront of tackling the issues posed by advanced language models and their impacts on our information landscape. Welcome to the podcast, John.
Yeah, thanks, Max. Happy to talk about this topic anytime.
Just to get us kicked off here, you have founded and co-founded a number of businesses in a short time. Any secrets to founding a successful business you would like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I'd say they haven't all been successful, but I think enough swings matters for sure. And I think the advice around always following your passions is usually not great, but you better be interested in what you're doing. And then there's just absolutely no substitute for relentless work.
Absolutely. Thank you. Moving us really to the topic du jour. This might seem like a silly question for you, but can you give us a sense of why is it important that we're able to identify organic versus AI generated content?
Depends on the use case. I think societally, there's an importance around misinformation. You know, half the world's population is exposed to an election year this year. The ability to create misleading information at scale is something that the world has never seen, and we now need to wrestle with. And so I think that's societally important reasons. And then you can get into some really topic-specific reasons, like within academia, to be able to use assigned writing as an educational instrument. There needs to be some understanding on whether or not a human wrote it or an AI wrote it. And then the world that we sort of focus on, which is website publishing, publishers both want to know that they are getting a fair deal. If they're paying a writer $100 for an article, they don't want to know that that just got copied and pasted out of ChatGPT in 5 seconds. And then they're also very afraid that Google is taking aggressive stances against AI spam. And if their content is nothing but AI, they will be wrapped up in potential updates and collateral damage.
So do you think requiring AI companies to identify if AI was used in the production of content, do you think that's the right approach?
I don't think so. But I think the reason why it's not is because there's certainly in text, the ability to defeat watermarking schemes will be fairly simple. And so I think putting in a defensive mechanism that will be easily overcome is probably not worth the sort of regulatory administration of that. In the case of images and video, where the societal harm to a single image is more significant, or a single video is more significant than the societal harm based off a single kind of piece of text. I think in those cases, the requirements, or at least sort of the best efforts to be able to declare if that was created, makes more sense.
Do you think that there are, sort of standards or regulatory process that would bring that about, or is there another approach that you think would be more effective?
OpenAI has certainly recently come out with their efforts around trying to communicate what they're going to be doing from an image generation and image authenticity. And I think there will never be a scenario where it is perfect. And any classifier will always be. I think we're at a state where there will be no sort of binary provable. This is AI generated or this is human generated. I think we're in a state where we will always need to understand there's a probability this was AI generated and there's a probability it was human generated. But it will be impossible to be in a state where we know with absolute certainty of the true authenticity of a piece of media.
So, sort of acknowledging that AI detection is pretty crucial then, what sort of complementary strategies do you think businesses and creators should use to enhance the quality and authenticity of their work?
We focus on text. That's sort of the world that we think about the most. We don't have an image or video detector. Similar technological sort of concepts in terms of being able to build a classifier that tells the difference between synthetic or human content. In the case of text, what can people do to exactly your question, sort of help ensure that the content is human generated, what they want, meets their specifications, building a relationship with a writer over a period of time and having it be a less transactional experience where writers just churn through content. And similarly with students, where if they're part of the journey and they understand the outcome is increased knowledge and not necessarily the grade, which I know is really hard for students. But understanding that content is part of a longer journey is I think sort of step one. Aligning expectations around what is allowed and what is not allowed is step two. And then step three is putting a control in place like Originality to say whether or not there's a probability that content was AI or not AI. And if there is potentially a false positive, which can happen about 2-3% of the time, where a detector will say incorrectly that we think this content is AI, even though it was written by a human, having other mechanisms in place to be able to visualize the creation process. So we have a free Chrome extension. So if somebody writes the document in Google Chrome, there's a bunch of metadata behind around every one of those revisions that has occurred that can be visualized. And then kind of between the relationship, the overall understanding of the goal, the relationship, the alignment around the procedure, the control within a detector, and then a sort of a fail safe around, okay, maybe this was a false positive. Let's visualize the creation process, hopefully produce a fairly trusted environment for everyone to be operating without anyone getting falsely accused or ripped off by writers using AI.
Gotcha. That sounds like a very novel utility to try to really help people out in this circumstance. Can you talk a little bit about where that might interface with things like maintaining SEO and not having your results filtered out by some of the AI stuff that Google's trying to do?
Google's in a really tricky spot. The company, sort of Alphabet, Google needs to be this AI forward, leading the charge on generative AI company. Yet if their search results, which is sort of their cash cow is their search results, and if those search results are nothing but AI filled content, why would people go to the search results? Why wouldn't they just go to the AI? And so I think it's a real existential threat to Google, and Google is needing to fight that. What we're seeing from studies that we've done is that up to 13% of search results are AI generated. Google is fighting back against that, attacking at one point de-indexing on March 5th. They did a manual action that de-indexed up to 2% of content sites. Most of those sites that were de-indexed, most of their content was AI generated. And that is sort of their attempts to fight back against AI spam. And one of my sayings right now that I like is that not all AI content is spam, but pretty confident that all spam right now on the internet has been AI generated. Because why wouldn't it be if that's what you're so with that update, it was sad. There were some people that contacted Originality to understand why did we get wrapped up in this update, and so our writers didn't use AI. How did you know? And then we ran it through our detector, and I mean we do get false positives, but not the rate that we saw. They were very clearly, their writers had at one point flipped from writing it themselves to spamming that website with AI content, and they got wrapped up. So yeah, I think it's a threat. I think it's a risk to publish AI generated content on your website. Google is needing to combat it and putting controls in place to accept the risk when it makes sense is critical for most website publishers.
Not necessarily as a plug. I think it's genuinely novel to the conversation, but Originality has their version 3. Can you talk a little bit about some of those upgrades over previous iterations? I think it's right spot on with what we're talking about here.
When sort of Jasper was predated ChatGPT, when sort of this world has evolved where what is human, what is AI is not always perfectly clear. Like if we have used Grammarly to edit an article, If you just use the word like the autocorrects, the paragraph, like that's okay. But if you sort of accepted all of the rewrites, some people don't want, some people that gets viewed as AI and people don't want that. So we're building different models for different use cases. So our standard is sort of a pretty balanced approach. That's our 2.0 standard. Our 3.0 is extremely hard to bypass, almost impossible to bypass. But trade-off of that is that it can tag content that had even light touches of AI on it. So if somebody uses Grammarly lightly, Turbo might still tag it as AI generated, whereas standard, and then we're building a light version, which should allow for human generated with some light AI editing, because each of those, our customers want to understand each of those different cases where it's like, I don't want AI at all. I want no sign of it. I want none of it to touch my site. Those are users of Turbo. And there's others that are saying, well, I just don't want it to be fully copied and pasted from ChatGPT. As long as we know that humans were involved in this, we're happy. And that's more in the direction of light. And then standard sort of falls in between those two. So yeah, no, it's as sort of the world evolves with, cyborg writing processes where, it's AI plus the human evolved, we're looking to sort of create solutions that fit what our customers are trying to ensure is their standard for what gets published on their site.
That's really fascinating. I love the idea of being able to meet people where they are, sort of recognizing that the use cases around AI are so broad. A one size fits all probably isn't going to work in an environment like that. What sort of things do you think a government consultancy, and so we sort of focus our world through government agencies, but I think it applies equally well to any sort of content generation. What sort of things can those folks do to try to future-proof their work against potential penalties or ranking issues due to AI-generated content?
In a world where words get cheaper, the value of a piece of content, the actual words that are on that page have diminished value because there's such a massive increase of supply of words. I think the logical outcome of that and sort of the future proofing aspect is to have a novel information gain in the world of Google, but have a unique insight, a unique piece of data, a unique asset that is on that page that isn't just a derivative of existing knowledge in the world. AI, phenomenal at taking existing knowledge, producing a derivative work based on that existing human knowledge. If you're doing the same thing and not adding anything net new to the conversation, you're now fighting with a sea of infinitely produced at zero cost words that is a derivative output of existing knowledge. If you have done a unique piece of research, a unique insight that isn't available as a sort of, again, derivative of existing work, then that future proofs people to both in the eyes of Google, they're looking for information gain, in the eyes of when you're producing content for companies as a consultant. Again, if they could have asked that same question to ChatGPT and gotten an answer versus having a unique data point, unique insight that pushes it beyond just a derivative work.
And are there any strategies you can think of if the sort of product you have is like a digest, or you're an aggregator of some sort, where you're not in the business of new and novel, but you are taking and trying to theme content and put it together for easier consumption?
Maybe AI is a great use of that. If it truly is the I think maybe it's the novel insight into the overall view that at the top, and then a great use of AI to summarize everything below. We use AI on our own website at times, and I think it's a great tool for writing. And there's great applications of it. And I think what you described is potentially there's a use case in there that is phenomenal for AI in terms of the ability to consume a massive amount of information and then digest it down. And then especially if, where's the human in the loop that adds net value is understanding the guy, what sources to put in to get summarized, and an overall analysis that is relevant to understanding who the human that is the reader.
That's really interesting. And definitely, I think that there's an interesting challenge in trying to suss out AI use that actually was designed for that purpose. The outputs are exactly what you want versus the AI that basically is a specialist in producing junk and making sure that it clogs our inboxes. I'm really curious about digging a little bit deeper into Originality AI as a tool to foster transparency and trust between agencies, between content creators and clients. Can you talk a little bit more about that? We find ourselves in a situation with our clients who have a fairly limited understanding of how something like that can work and what its positive aspects are. And that we're always looking for new ways to try to educate them around how you can use tools like that to really further the relationship rather than categorize all the ways where the relationship is risky.
When we started building this tool, we really thought we were on the side of, and we still think we are, on the side of writers, we felt like our tool stood between writers and being competed against with anybody, even regardless of their writing capabilities, because they had access to ChatGPT. Best writers in the world, sure, don't have to worry. But certainly for someone that writes as like me, ChatGPT is a way better writer than I am. And so in terms of trust and transparency within the clients, what we have seen is it being used both very effectively to achieve that outcome of, great, you are my writer, we have a relationship, we are eager to have you continue to work with us. We don't want AI, we're going to use Originality as a check, and we have this control if this tool potentially fails to ensure that we don't have a false positive, and the relationship continues on a trusted basis. Everyone's happy. We've also seen the tool be misused and be applied with sort of a binary classification on you must meet X score, and I don't want to hear about any sort of potential false positive. And it sets up this really sort of combative relationship between writers and agencies or publishers that just require a hard score when there are at times, like I said, 2-3% false positive rate. And especially that gets applied without any initial communication around what is acceptable and not acceptable. Is the use of AI to edit your own thoughts acceptable? In some cases, absolutely. We have English as a second language AI researchers. They use AI heavily in the creation of the content that we publish on our site because it's all such net new information, but it benefits them. So, kind of back to what I talked about, it's hard to sort of just plug a tool in and it solves all problems. It's that sort of multi-step approach around establishing what expectations are between a writer and an agency and what allowable use is, and then to have this tool as a control, ensuring that sort of allowable use is what gets executed.
I'm really intrigued by having a technology tool that in its best implementation is really fostering a more personal relationship between a client and an employee. I mean, it almost turns the whole situation on its head, and that's really intriguing. Have you seen its use in academia for validation of student content? And what's that like when you're doing a one-to-many relationship instead of more of a one-to-one boss-writer sort of situation?
AI is being abused in academia, right? There's just no question about it that AI cheating is extremely prevalent. When we first launched, we went and spoke with academia. I'll sort of generalize, but had some conversations. We came from the world of content marketing, but we saw that this was such a clear use case within academia. I had some conversations about sort of trying to understand, like, what is your academic enforcement mechanism right now? What triggers that? What we saw is that the consequences of being tagged with academic dishonesty is very, very high. And as a result, and rightfully so, the burden of proof is also extremely, extremely high and needs to be applied with a binary guilty or not guilty lens. Detectors will never be that. And so I think we're the only AI detector in the world that recommends our tool not be used within academia, and definitely recommends our tool not be used for academic disciplinary action. Now, it's being used heavily by teachers because they're just getting overrun and they want the best tool. It's maybe a little bit of a cop-out on our end to say don't use our tool and then kind of put up our hands and not be responsible for its use within academia. And so we're trying to navigate that. The sort of, it's not perfect. It's really, really accurate, but not perfect, is not good enough for academic disciplinary action. And that makes its use within academia really, really tricky. So how should it be used? Similarly, like coming back to sort of educating on what is acceptable use and not acceptable use, a student that uses Grammarly like in English as a second language student that uses Grammarly heavily, has a premium account, and auto rewrites a bunch of their work, going to get tagged by AI. But was that allowed or not allowed? And that's a conversation between the teacher and the student. So we see tons of teachers using it and being extremely appreciative, and it being like, it confirmed what I knew. This was a C- student, and then submitted an A+, twice the required length, and got tagged at 100% AI. Pretty confident. And so we like the Chrome extension comes into play, but it's all that same information, but veering away from academic disciplinary action and more towards conversation.
Do you ever see students using it to validate that they actually did originally author their work, like the exact flip side of that?
Yeah, so we see students and writers a lot. A funny use case is there's as people in SEO that are wanting to sort of not get caught by Google for publishing AI content will create it with AI, use it, try and sort of manipulate it, add in mistakes, make the content worse to then bypass detection and then publish it. And we really strongly recommend against that. You're publishing worse, intentionally publishing worse content. That's a bad use case. But yes, so we see writers and students knowing that they're going to be judged by that, the same way that they would use a plagiarism checker before they submitted their work in case there was accidental plagiarism, and be in a position to be able to, hey, here's my work. It might get tagged by AI, but here's my replay of my writing via this Chrome extension that shows I definitely created this.
In a government context, any sort of publicly released information goes through many different layers of review. And there are some of those layers that follow pretty strict and predictable rules. I'm thinking things like 508 compliance for access functional needs and disability use. I know that there are AI tools out there that are being used to try to validate that content is congruent with that. It sounds like this would be a circumstance where that would probably flag on the checker because of the way that that's being used. However, it's being used for a very specific government purpose. I feel like this is another instance where you would have your tool sort of fostering that relationship between the content generators and the PIO folks that are needing to validate that it meets criteria. Would you agree with that?
We are a great tool inside an editorial process. There are times where the existing editorial process is so intense and so elevated that they don't really care whether it was AI or not, because there were so many humans in the loop reviewing that piece of work. An example of that is sort of tier editorial magazines, newspapers, etc., where they're writing for impact, and that's the lens that they're being evaluated on. And if AI was used, it's usually not. Like, I think that's usually not the case, because it is almost always net new information that isn't a derivative work. We see the largest newspapers in the world rarely use us, and I think it would be similar within a sort of a process that you described, where whether it's AI or not, there's other checks that are more important for it to meet.
Gotcha. If you were to briefly put yourself into the shoes of a government agency who was looking to be able to articulate sound policy, sound regulations around AI usage, what would be some of the things that you would be identifying and be really concerned about, making sure that you were providing good guidance for the people you serve, and making sure that the quality of the content you're producing meets a certain standard?
Yeah. So from a regulatory standpoint, I think the locations where societal harm can come from the smallest input is the location to, I think, focus the regulatory. And I think that's video, images, audio. That's where verifying authenticity is going to be a big deal. I saw there was sort of a statement around, like, if there's ever a video that comes out that or a photo, the sort of right strategy from a political standpoint, and this is the wrong strategy, but is to go get a bunch of AI manipulated images of that exact same image, and then it would be hard to figure out which one was which, and this sort of obfuscation through noise. I think that's where societal harm will occur. I think that's the focus in terms of the content that is being produced by the government. I think where AI is going to cause harm, AI text is going to cause harm within a government, is if it gets unleashed without a human in the loop. and ensuring. So I think there's a whole range from, the most controlled document that gets published down to marketing material that gets put out by a local BIA. I think there's a big range in content. I think where the highest risk exists is offensive hallucinations that get published at more like the level where there's fewer humans in the loop. And so I think ensuring that there is a requirement that there will always be humans in the loop. And if those controls are limited to one human, then potentially AI detection being required as part of that control process to know if crap, we better make sure that there were no hallucinations in this because this was likely AI generated.
Had any of your interactions with any sort of governmental agency in any country that is thinking along those terms?
So we don't have anyone. I'd say I'm unfamiliar with any conversation at the level of saying this is required across the entire organization. However, we have a lot of interactions with like a BIA or a government agency that is in the business of publishing content to be consumed by users and has a editorial control process that is a light or editorial control process where it's a writer and an editor and then hit publish. In those situations, originality is being used to help ensure that and then the other pocket that we're seeing use within government is within like the world of IP. Big question mark there on copywriting AI generated work, a patent that has been AI generated. I don't know, big question mark that I'm not capable of answering, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like there's a lot to do in terms of sussing that stuff out. And the patent and trademark offices in every country obviously are not harmonized. I can't speak for everywhere, but a lot of those databases are a bit long in the tooth, to say the least.
Yeah.
I'm also curious, just in terms of other collaborative opportunities that you've come across. I mean, we've talked about academia a bit. We've talked about content creation for web in particular, and definitely some governmental functions. Are there other arenas that you guys are focusing on, finding a lot of interest in AI validation verification?
Maybe in terms of like where regulatory would potentially make sense is defining pockets where even AI generated text doesn't make a lot of sense. So in one of those being so the FTC, I could see the FTC being involved in talking about reviews and saying that you shouldn't have AI generated reviews on your site, or you shouldn't use the same as they say you shouldn't use fake reviews. Extending that to AI generated reviews, questionable. I don't know about if that makes sense, but I think it's pretty clear that people don't want to read a review that was generated by an AI when they think that it was generated written by a human. And so we've seen a lot of interest in our tool within user-generated content platforms, especially review sites, where in some studies that we've run, we've seen up to 30% of reviews since the launch of ChatGPT having been AI generated. I think that's not a net benefit for society. Big fan of AI, but that there will be pockets that will not be all good. And I think the inability to believe reviews. What's the best headphone? Who cares? What's the best baby food for my child that has this allergic reaction? I don't want to read AI reviews. And I think that's a sort of falls under the FTC umbrella of potential regulation could be applied, and it potentially makes sense.
I like to ask everyone that comes on the show essentially the same question, putting yourself into the shoes of a regulator. If you were going to be providing guidance for these folks, I mean, this tends to be a pretty new topic for them. And then it's a whole patchwork of what their background is. So some people are experts in this area, and some people, this is landed on their desk, and now this is what they're focusing on. If you were to provide them any bit of guidance around how to make sure that they do the most with their role, what sort of advice would you give them?
It's a unique development that is very usable by everyone. I think what I would say is use it heavily, use it, all the new tools, deploy a model yourself. There's depending on where they sit on that challenge, on that competency scale within tech. But I think the bar to use is so incredibly low that I would be very afraid of someone needing to make decisions about the restrictions on the use without being heavy users themselves. And I think that the main one.
Sound advice. Also, I love it when someone comes up with a new answer for that question. I don't think anybody has ever suggested go use it, kick the tires, make sure you know what you're about to regulate. I think we're coming to the end of our time here, but I wanted to open the floor up to you. Any last thoughts or words for our listeners today?
Yeah, no, it's interesting times, and no new thoughts, but yeah, great questions. You're really interesting challenges within the regulatory world about dealing with this. So yeah, I'd say I don't envy anyone that is sitting in that role, because it is going to be incredibly challenging to get mostly right.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, John. This was a really great conversation. And to our listeners, we'll see you next time. Thank you.
AI, Government and the Future is brought to you by Corner Alliance. To find out more about Corner Alliance and how we work with government to create results, visit our website at corneralliance.com. And then make sure to search for AI Government Future in Apple Podcasts, Spotify and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Corner Alliance, thanks for listening.